Welcome to the deep dive. It's pretty rare, isn't it, to see a really significant positive change in a political debate that's gotten super heated, especially when you're talking about a huge community project. It's just not something you see every day, where positions that seem set in stone start to, well, soften up or even completely change. But when it does happen, it gives you this fascinating look into how local government actually works, the dynamics, the power plays. Today, we're doing an in-depth exploration of exactly that kind of development. It's coming out of Boca Raton, Florida, and it's about a proposed mega project called Frisbee-Terra. Our guide for this dive is a really compelling column from the Boca Raton Tribune. It's titled A Shift in Stance on the Mega Project Debate, written by the publisher Douglas Heiser, back on September 10th, 2025. So our mission today is to really unpack this article. We want to understand not just what happened, but also dig into what this unexpected shift really means for community engagement, for political leadership, and I think fundamentally for the democratic process itself. It's a story about how public pressure, and maybe a willingness to listen, can genuinely change things. Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't just about Boca Raton, is it? What's so compelling is that it's like a microcosm. It gives us a perfect window into how these complex issues around big developments often play out anywhere, really. You see that push and pull, the tension between citizens and their elected officials, and just how critical that whole dynamic is. For me, what's truly fascinating here is how the public's view of the leadership could shift so dramatically. And what does that tell us about the power of, sustained public dialogue and that demand for accountability? It's like a fundamental test of how our democratic systems are actually supposed to work on the ground.
It really is. Yeah. And to get a sense of how big this shift was, we need to understand the situation before this turning point. Douglas Heiser, in his column before this one, apparently didn't mince words at all. He'd harshly criticized the omission of the mayor and the city council regarding the Frisbee-Terra mega project, end quote. He actually explicitly said that the ones who had taken the lead were the members of Save Boca, not the elected leadership. So that paints a picture of a real leadership vacuum, right? Where the community felt the officials were just kind of absent.
Yeah, disengaged, leaving citizens to do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a feeling of being ignored. Heiser pointed to Mayor Scott Singer's stance at the time. Apparently, the mayor had declared that the decision had already been made. Now, when a leader says that, that's pretty definitive. Heiser described this approach as making the mayor seem, quote, arrogant and closed to dialogue, and that he treated differing opinions as if they were personal attacks against him or the city. That's a really strong description, isn't it?
It's incredibly strong and deeply problematic for the democratic process. When officials signal that the decisions made, it doesn't just sideline citizens, it can actively alienate them. It basically undermines the whole idea that their voice matters, makes public input feel like, well, just going through the motions, or worse, like an annoyance.
Right, like a box-ticking exercise.
Exactly. And this kind of stance, it raises a critical question. What impact does that perceived arrogance, that closed-mindedness from leaders actually have on public trust? And maybe even more importantly, on people's willingness to even bother participating next time? Does it shut them down? Or maybe paradoxically, does it light a fire under them, like we saw with this Save Boca group?
That's a fascinating point, that it could actually galvanize people instead of silencing them. So with that kind of charged atmosphere, you can just imagine the tension building up to the next council meeting.
Yeah.
But then, according to Heiser, something significant happened. He writes, this week's council member meeting marked a milestone in the debate. He observed something different. There has been a shift in stance, not just a small adjustment, but a real pivot.
A milestone, yeah. That's a strong word.
It is. And Heiser details Mayor Singer's new approach. He says the mayor adopted a different posture, humble, open, and attentive to the population. This wasn't just changing the words, it was a change in demeanor, how he carried himself. Heiser notes the mayor recognized the essential role of listening to citizens, and that this showed, quote, political maturity and a willingness to promote conciliation. I mean, to go from the decisions made to recognizing the essential role of listening, that's quite a turnaround.
It's a remarkable turnaround, especially in politics.
And Heiser gives a specific example that really seems to back this up. He noted that Mayor Singer, quote, was gracious with people, even when some were disrespectful toward him. That kind of composure, taking criticism, maybe even hostility, and still engaging constructively. That says a lot.
It really does.
Yeah.
It suggests it wasn't just for show, because that contrast with past attitudes revealed political maturity, as Heiser puts it. And this isn't just about being nice, it's strategic in a good way. recognizing that, look, in the long run, involving people usually leads to better, more lasting outcomes. Even if it feels slower or messier up front, it builds that mandate.
Builds legitimacy.
Exactly. And connecting this to the bigger picture, moments like this, they strengthen the local democratic process. Why? Because when people see their actions, their voices actually lead to a change in direction. Well, it boosts their faith in the system, makes them more likely to engage again, right? Constructively, not just angrily. It reinforces that idea that democracy is built this way, with healthy debate, conciliation, and above all, the willingness to correct course when necessary. Leaders have to be responsive.
That's a really powerful way to put it. And it leads us right into Heiser's commendations in the article, which are quite revealing. He didn't just praise Mayor Singer for the change in tone, but specifically for choosing conciliation, making that active choice. But it wasn't just the mayor. He also congratulated all the other city council members. He names Fran Eckles, Mark Wigder, Andy Thompson, Yvette Drucker for also choosing the path of conciliation. Especially, he says, in a tense scenario. He sees this collective move as demonstrating political maturity and respect for public dialogue.
So it wasn't just one person changing their mind. It was a broader shift in the council's approach.
Seems like it. And critically, Heiser also gives major credit to the Save Boca group. He recognized them for turning ordinary residents into activists aware of their rights and their strength. Okay. He literally calls it citizenship in action. It really highlights how crucial these grassroots movements can be, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They're not just protesters. They're active participants shaping policy.
Right. And then interestingly, he even commended the developer, Frisbee-Terra, for, quote, opening itself to what the citizens are asking. Now, that's significant, because often developers on these huge projects can be pretty resistant to changing course once things are moving.
Very significant. It suggests even they recognize that ignoring the community wasn't sustainable for the project's future. And these commendations taken together, they tell a much richer story, don't they? It shows that positive change, well, it can come from different places all at once. Leadership evolves, citizens push hard and smart, and even developers can adapt. That phrase, citizenship in action, it's not just fluff. It underscores the real power of organized community voices. It's a validation.
Yeah, a validation of their right to have a say. So, okay, after all this positive movement, this shift towards listening, what does it actually mean for the Frisbee-Terra project itself? Is it smooth sailing now? Well, Heiser is very clear on this point. The debate is far from over, he adds, and could not be otherwise given the magnitude of this project. So, this isn't the end. It's more like a new beginning. A different chapter focused on working together instead of fighting.
A turning point, not an end point. Makes sense for something this big.
Exactly. And he reminds us that the really tough issues are still on the table. Things like traffic, which is never just about cars, right? It's about planning, safety, quality of life. Then there's density, how it affects housing, green space, everything. Appraisal, the value, the costs versus benefits, and of course the actual costs and the environmental impact. These are huge, complicated things.
They're the nuts and bolts. And while making this big step towards conciliation is huge, it doesn't magically solve those core challenges. This is where that old French proverb Heiser quoted really fits. Rome ne fut pas faite tout en un jour. Rome wasn't built in a day. This moment, this shift, it's the foundation. It's created a space for maybe a more productive conversation, but it's definitely not the finished building.
Right.
And it raises a really important question, not just for Boca Raton, but for any community dealing with something like this. How do you keep that positive momentum going? How do you sustain that engagement and conciliation when you get into the weeds? The technical stuff, the compromises, that's often the hardest part, you know? Keeping people involved and trusting the process through all of that.
That's such a great point. It's easy to rally around a big symbolic shift, but the follow-through on the details is where things can get tricky. Still, this deep dive into what happened in Boca Raton, it really shows us how local politics can change, how powerful your voice can be, especially when it's organized and persistent, and how, like Heiser said, truth has flourished when that open dialogue actually happens instead of decisions being made behind closed doors. It's a pretty powerful example of democracy in action, I think.
It really is. This whole situation in Boca Raton, it serves as this potent reminder, doesn't it? That, okay, disagreements, even strong ones, they're normal in a democracy. They're probably even healthy. But real progress, moving forward together, often comes down to the willingness of everyone involved, leaders, citizens, yeah, even the developers, to actually shift their stance sometimes, to listen, to look for common ground, for conciliation. It really speaks to the idea that engagement, genuine engagement, can transform even really entrenched positions. It's not just about this one project. It feels like a potential blueprint for better governance.
Absolutely. And thinking about that, it leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If a really contentious public debate, like this one in Boca Raton, can pivot so dramatically from the decisions already made to a place of humility and active listening, what responsibility do we have as citizens in our own towns and cities? A responsibility to both demand that kind of political maturity from our leaders, but also maybe to reward it when we see it. And maybe how can we all work to foster more of these kinds of historic steps, as Heiser called them, towards local governance that's truly engaged and genuinely responsive? Something to think about long after this deep dive ends.